Having spent some time in Amphoreus, I'm sure you've noticed that the main story pretty much revolves around the prophecy. You know, the one that talks about how 12 heroes will save Amphoreus by defeating the Titans and invoking the miracle of Genesis. While practically everyone knows about the prophecy, for some reason I can't seem to find where exactly it came from. Some sources refer to it as the prophecy of creation and that it originated from Cephalli, while others called it the tripartite prophecy and credited the three titans of fate. There are even accounts that the prophecy hasn't been fully revealed and will only be completed sometime in the future. Basically, for every source that claimed one thing, there was another that contradicted it. So what if all these contradicting stories turned out to be wrong, and the prophecy doesn't come from where many believes it does, but rather somewhere else entirely? That's what I want to discuss in this video, the origins of the Amphoreus prophecy and its true purpose. Before we get into that, if you want to see more Honkai Star Rail content, do consider subscribing to the channel. Like most theory videos, this one is filled with spoilers, especially for the 3.0 and the 3.1 story. So if you haven't played through them yet, consider this your obligatory spoiler warning. Amphoreus is pretty much the land of prophecy. The primary mission of the Chrysos heirs are based on a prophecy. Each demigod has a personal prophecy related to their future demise, and there was even an entire city, Yanosopolis, whose sole export was providing predictions of the future. The most famous and well-known of all of these is, of course, the prophecy that kicked off the Flame Chase journey. As I mentioned in the intro, there are several names and variations of this particular prophecy. At times, it's referred to as the prophecy of creation, while on other occasions, it's mentioned as the tripartite prophecy. Even Aglaya has referred to it as something else entirely, calling it the prophecy of deliverance. The chronology of its appearance is also currently rather confusing. Cephalli was mentioned to have delivered this prophecy before they faded away, which was some time ago, but is also rumored to have been prophesied by the three titans of fate, which takes us even further back in history. Even its origins are not immediately clear because depending on what you called it and where you heard it from, it might have a completely different origin story. To put it simply, we don't know what its true name is, we don't know how long ago it appeared, and we don't even know who first said it. While any of these variations might turn out to be the actual truth, I'm starting to doubt this is the case, as there exist quite a few contradictions in Amphoreus' commonly accepted history. For example, the three titans of calamity were said to have brought the black tide to Amphoreus to functionally end the world. However, at least one of those titans, Nicodor, has actively tried to prevent its spread. Then you have the prophecy or the Flame Chase journey itself, which claims to be humanity's only source of salvation. However, some of the titans we have met, like Janus and Oronix, have outright warned the Chrysos heirs to not meddle with it, as it would only lead to problems. Finally, like what I mentioned earlier, and many of you gave this response when I asked about the prophecy's origins, the prophecy is thought to originate from Cephalli themselves. But there's something that contradicts this as well, given Oronix mentions during their conversation with Tribi that Cephalli would never guide humans to kill their own comrades, implying it isn't them. So all these contradictions is what made me really suspicious as to the origins and purpose of the prophecy. What if the prophecy isn't even designed to save humanity? What if it isn't even from Amphoreus? But if the Titans didn't create it and someone else did, who were they and why? So let's speculate a bit on other potential sources, starting with perhaps the most obvious, the three eons. One of the earliest mentions of the prophecy was through the Bath sprite in Okuma, who referred to the well-known prophecy as the tripartite prophecy. Tripartite essentially means something shared or involving three different parties, so having specifically three eons involved in Amphoreus can't be a coincidence. Eons like Qlipoth and Enna have formed alliances before in the past, so perhaps all three eons are working together to achieve a common goal. Maybe Fu Li created the world based on memories, Nous introduced its system of divinity, and the third eon might be the curtain closer. I've suspected for some time now that this third eon could be Terminus, and it fits quite well here. The eon of finality represents both the beginning and end of something. Perhaps in Amphoreus, Terminus is both the origin of the prophecy and will eventually be the end of the world. I mean, the prophecy started the Flame Chase journey and at its conclusion will result in the miracle of Genesis, which will likely restart Amphoreus itself. So to follow the prophecy is to literally end and restart Amphoreus. This also fits quite well with the prophecy's other name, the prophecy of creation, which in this case again reflects on Terminus. Now, what exactly these eons are trying to achieve, I don't really know, but if I were to proffer a guess, I would assume it has something to do with either divinity itself or opposing fate. Perhaps they wish to see if fate is indeed immutable or if it's something that can be contested. We also know that the eons are all bound by the primer mobile, so maybe they just got tired and are looking to free themselves from the fate that binds them. On the other hand, it's entirely possible that each of them has a completely different goal and are just working together to ensure they get what they want. If this were the case, it might explain why the Titans are so wary of the prophecy, given it comes from what would essentially be their captors. To add to that, if the eons are the ones ensuring Amphoreus continues in a loop through the prophecy, it could also be why the Titans advise humanity to avoid it. So one possible source of the tripartite prophecy could very well be the eons who are secretly watching the planet. Now, while the whole tripartite thing does fit quite well with the three eons idea, given there are three of them, there is another faction grouped in threes. You see, when the Titans were first introduced, they were categorized in groups of three. 3 carved the heavens and the earth, 3 wove the threads of fate, 3 molded life with their hands, and 3 guided calamity's gate. So perhaps the tripartite prophecy came from one of these groups of Titans. Right off the bat, those that wove the threads of fate seem unlikely, as we have heard both Dianus and Oronix warn against following this very prophecy. For the 3 that molded life, Oronix mentioned that Kefali would never lead humanity down that road due to their immense love for them, so that leaves those that created Amphoreus and those guiding Calamity. Just from those titles alone, I'm sure you would assume it's the Titans of Calamity, and you might be right. These Titans were supposedly bringing about the end of Amphoreus, and the conclusion of the prophecy is the rewriting of the planet itself. Plus, as I mentioned earlier, the Black Tide was said to have arrived with the Titans of Calamity, but Nicodor openly opposed it. So maybe the calamity they brought was not the Black Tide, but instead the prophecy. The problem with this idea is that the Titans of Calamity came only towards the end of Amphoreus' timeline, and likely after the prophecy had already descended, which chronologically doesn't really fit. So that leaves the Titan of Creation, who are credited with the literal creation of Amphoreus. The only reason I could see for this particular group to spread such a prophecy is purely because it facilitates the creation of Amphoreus. If the miracle of Genesis really is a hard reset which recreates the world, perhaps this group took it upon themselves to ensure the world is perpetually recreated. Now, despite me writing off the Titans of Fate due to their apparent apprehension of the prophecy, it could be that they're just lying. The prophecy very clearly outlines a potential future for Amphoreus, so why shouldn't it be associated with the Titans of Fate? And while I do want to keep in theme with the tripartite idea and how threes are important to prophecies in Amphoreus, this could just end up being the work of a singular Titan. That said, the Titans being the origins of the prophecy seems a little less likely given most of them have an alibi or reason not to spread it. Because by doing so, they would essentially put into motion their own deaths, so it's unlikely, but I still need to explore it as we know too little about them to be sure. So far, we have explored the possibility that the prophecy came from the Eons and potentially Titans, which is a pretty straightforward guess. These are after all godlike beings, capable of warping reality and seeing the future. But what if the prophecy didn't come from some all-knowing god, but instead is the work of a singular individual? I'm kind of reminded of how the Avengers were broken up in the MCU, not by some cosmic level threat, but rather a father looking for vengeance, Baron Zemo. So perhaps this was the work of a very determined and capable individual. But who among the many in Amphoreus could it possibly be? Well, I think that it might actually be Cyrene. Now, to be fair, we don't actually know that much about her, and she is said to have died sometime before the events of the current story, which, if taken at face value, outright debunks this idea. Plus, she was seemingly alive around the time Finan was still young, which is admittedly in the past but still far ahead of when the prophecy supposedly first released. So, she couldn't have possibly created the prophecy. The thing is, she has quite a few reasons to want this prophecy to exist in its current form. Firstly, we know she wants Finan to pursue the hero's journey, and the prophecy pretty much sets that up for him. Secondly, Elysia, her Honkai Impact 3rd alt, was the one who brought together the 13 Flame Chasers, so maybe she is replicating her actions in this world as well. Personally, I preferred if the story remained different altogether, but we can't discount the possibility. Thirdly, she herself is likely a chrysos heir and might have some skin in the game when it comes to the prophecy. Finally, the fact that we don't know anything about her makes her all the more suspicious. There might be things we aren't aware of yet that might motivate Cyrene into doing this, and it could be anything from revenge to simply other motives. The biggest problem with this idea is, how could she be responsible for the prophecy if she was known to be around only recently? Well, firstly, we don't know how old Cyrene actually is. Death arrived on Amphoreus only after the era of Chrysia ended, during which time Thanatos descended. Before then, most people on Amphoreus were immortal, and she could have been around all the way back then when the prophecy first dropped. Plus, with how many theories there are about Cyrene's connection with March and Mem, maybe she has some timey-wimey powers and can influence the past in some way. So while it seems impossible, there are ways that she could have achieved this. I would even go so far as to say that perhaps the reason so many contradictions exist in Amphoreus is because she fundamentally changed something in the past. Maybe the prophecy did originally come from Kefali, but not the version we currently know, given Cyrene might have altered it. Now, at the end of the day, all these are just theories, and we don't know for sure what the origins or the purpose of this prophecy really is. As I said earlier, little is known about it other than the message it's conveying, so we'd have to wait until the story develops further to truly know. Maybe there isn't even a giant conspiracy here, and the prophecy is really just a plot tool and nothing more. With that though, I'll end the video here. Which of these ideas do you think is the most likely, or do you have a completely alternative idea? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you found the video entertaining, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and as usual, have a nice day.